Um, Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Personal Independence Payment. Everything that you do need to know. And I'm your host, Adam Matthews. So if we could just move on to the next slide there. So just to introduce myself, I'm the Social Delivery Manager at Society Matters. For people that haven't joined our sessions before at the Royal Voluntary Service, it's great to be on board. So my background is I've been a benefit specialist for many years with Citizens Advice, and one of the primary issues that I've dealt with since the benefit reform in 2013 has been personal independence payment itself. So that's what we're going to be having a deep dive into today. So thank you very much for joining us on this session, and we look forward to joining us on the next session as well, which will be around attendance allowance, so the benefit for people over state pension age that may have a disability or long-term health condition. But today we're very much going to be focusing on personal independence payment itself. So we could just move on to the next slide there. So just a little bit of the background around today. So it's an honour to be working with the Royal Voluntary Service. Just ourselves, Society Matters, we are the trading subsidiary of Citizens Advice Gateshead. So we're all about social value. We're all about mobilising knowledge, which is what today's session is all about. We're very proud to have worked with over 350 organisations now, obviously the Royal Voluntary Service being one of them. And you can see some of the other people that we've been working with on the screen there themselves. So thank you again for joining us on this session. And we could just move on to the next slide. So what are our aims and learning objectives for today? So we're going to have a look at who is eligible for personal independence payment. We will be having a look at the application process itself, so the three-stage application process. We're going to be talking about the PIP descriptors, and that's one of the links that we're going to be popping in for you as well, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So really, really important when we are making an application for personal independence payment. Also as well, if a person has to attend an assessment, that people are aware of the PIP descriptors themselves. That's how PIP is scored. So we'll be looking at them in detail. We've got 10 daily living descriptors, and we've got 2 for mobility. We'll also be having a look at what supporting evidence is recommended as well. So really, really important with personal independence payment. The form, which we'll be discussing, kind of makes out if you leave the details of people that might be supporting you, GPs, specialists, etc., that they're going to chase them up. Quite often that isn't the case. So it's really important to really watertight the case that we do have that supporting evidence with an application as well. So we'll be talking about some things that we can use. And really importantly, it's kind of really important to have a full benefit check once somebody is entitled to PIP as well, because potentially that's going to be something that opens the door to other benefits and financial support. We'll also be having plenty of time at the end for questions and answers as well. So please do make a note of any questions that you do have, and I'll do my best to answer them at the end of the session as well. Okay, thank you. If we could just move on to the next slide itself. So what is personal independence payment itself? So as we just mentioned before, it did replace disability living allowance for adults for most people when we had the benefit reform in 2013. It is a benefit for people aged between 16 and their state pensionable age. If people become over the state pensionable age, obviously we'll be having a look at attendance allowance. That is the benefit that we'll be looking at in the next session. But personal independence payment is for people what the DWP would class as of working age, so age between 16 and state pensionable age itself. Again, just a reminder, if people are aged under 16, that would be disability living allowance for children. And that is the session that we covered last time. If that's something that you've missed, please check out on the RVS website and YouTube channel to catch up with that session itself. Now, personal independence payment, it's not about the condition that you do have or a diagnosis. It's more about how that condition or other conditions that you might have, if you have more than one, affects your daily living and your mobility itself. And this is where we'll be looking at the descriptors themselves. So daily living challenges, they would be things such as, do you need help with preparing food? Do you need support with washing and bathing. It could be that you need support with communication skills as well. You have problems expressing yourself. So that's really, really important. What we tend to say when we are supporting people with PIP is justify the points, because it is a points-based system. And we will be looking at that shortly when we do look at the descriptors themselves. With the mobility, there are 2 descriptors for that. Moving around is one, which very much focuses on your physical mobility challenges, how far you can walk before you come breathless. If somebody needs the use of a wheelchair, they should be scoring higher points, which we'll be looking at in a bit more detail shortly. But it also looks at your ability to plan and follow journeys safely. So somebody that might have challenges with mental health, neurodiverse conditions, which would make them more vulnerable in public, that's a descriptor that we very much need to be focusing on. So it's not just about the physical mobility as well. If we could just move on to the next slide there, thank you. So who is eligible for PIP? And we are just going to pop in the eligibility criteria into the chat box there for you. Well, they do expect you to have what's called the qualifying period. So they expect you to be suffering from the symptoms of that condition, or be able to demonstrate that you're struggling with them symptoms or challenges, daily living challenges, mobility challenges. And they do expect them challenges or the support that you need to go on for another 9 months as well. Now, that shouldn't put you off from making a claim as soon as possible. If it's a condition that has come across quite quickly, so just to give you an example of someone that I was supporting quite recently, was a long distance lorry driver, had no problems with his health for quite a long time, suddenly became ill overnight, had a stroke, and it was quite clear that he wasn't going to be able to work for quite a long time, and that his condition wasn't going to get better. You know, that's a case study where perhaps we would be making that application as soon as possible, because it is prospective to last for longer than 9 months. What we needed to do in them circumstances is to get the evidence of that, and that was in the form of, and we'll be discussing this later when we talk about evidence, support from the stroke services that he was engaging with, and his GP as well. What we do tend to say is, if that condition does affect you more than 51% of the time, you could work that out over a week, or you could work that out over a month or a year, then it's definitely worth having a look at PIP, because that's something that the DWP are going to be looking for. Does that condition affect you more than 51% of the time? PIP, of course, isn't just for physical conditions. It could be neurodiverse conditions. It could be mental health as well. What we do see is quite often physical health and mental health go hand in hand. So people that are suffering from a physical condition or a mobility condition has a detrimental effect on their mental health quite often as well. So it's really, really important, if there is more than one condition, that we do address all the conditions that person has. And also as well, we address all the questions in the application process, making sure that we're using them PIP descriptors, which we'll be looking at, but also as well, just having a look at, you know, how does that affect that person day to day? One thing that we do recommend is using a PIP diary, and I will be popping that into the chat box there. We do have a PIP diary that you can use, or somebody that you're supporting could use as well. Now, the reason why that's really handy to put in with a PIP application is it does show a DWP decision maker how long and how often them challenges that you have are affecting that person as well. So it's a really good form of evidence there. Okay. And if we could just move on to the next slide there, please. So going a bit deeper into the eligibility. So you don't actually need a diagnosis from a doctor. Of course, it does help if you do. That's something that you could use as supporting evidence. But PIP is supposed to be about how your conditions or condition affects you on a day-to-day basis. So remember, they're going to be looking at the daily living challenges that you have. If you do get support from somebody else, we could use that as evidence. So what would happen if you did have a carer and that carer wasn't there for you? If that carer comes round and prepares all your meals for you, you should be scoring higher points. What we do need to demonstrate is if you can't do it yourself, why is that the case? And DWP decision makers as well, they like to know what histories have, what's gone wrong in the past. That's something that can be used as evidence. That could be in your application on the form, and that could be talking to the assessor as well if you do have a PIP assessment that you do need to come in for. It's very much a non-means tested benefit. So it doesn't matter if you've got £0 in the bank or £1 million in the bank. If you're eligible for personal independence payment, you meet the criteria that we've been talking around. It's not going to affect any income. More than likely, it's going to bring more income in for you. And we'll be talking about that towards the end of the session today. So as we mentioned before, it's worth getting a full benefit check once you are entitled to PIP. So just to give you an example, if you've got a carer that's caring for you over 35 hours per week, you're entitled to the standard element, the standard rate of personal independence payment for the daily living. They could potentially get carer's allowance or the carer's element of universal credit in them circumstances. So it's not going to reduce anything. It's probably going to add income to the family and your support structure. Really importantly, there are special rules for people who are terminally ill. So if they have a life expectancy of less than 12 months, that's going to be a really stressful time for families. It's probably going to have more costs as well, taxi visits to hospitals, etc., things like that. So that extra financial support is going to be needed. What we can do is make sure the application goes through a lot quicker. So a normal application at the moment could take around up to 13, 14, 15 weeks, longer in some cases if they're looking for more evidence. With the special rules, that could go through in 2 weeks. And that would mean you'd automatically get the enhanced rate for the daily living component as well. You wouldn't have to attend an assessment. What we would need to do is just to get that supporting evidence from a GP or a specialist that's supporting that person, and that application can go through a lot quicker. So we are going to pop into the chat box the special rules claiming for people that are terminally ill. Okay. You do need to meet the nationality and past and present requirements. So that means you can't be subject to immigration control in the UK. So UK and Irish citizens, people that have refugee status, people that have come over of the EU settled scheme, all would be entitled to PIP in them circumstances. People that are claiming asylum, until they have a decision, unfortunately aren't going to be able to claim PIP in them circumstances. Okay. And if we could just move on to the next slide there. So in terms of how to apply to for PIP itself, there are 3 stages to that application process. The first part is just letting the DWP know that you'd like to make an application for PIP so they can get the PIP form sent out to you. That should take no more than 30 minutes. You do call the PIP helpline, which is on your screen there, so the 0800 917 2222 number. There's a few things that you will need. You will need your date of birth, you'll need your national insurance number, you'll need your doctor's details or local doctor's surgery details, your current address. You will need to give a brief overview of your condition, or your conditions that you do have. Now, if somebody, and we do see a lot of people in this situation, gets quite anxious about talking to the Department for Work and Pensions, they can confirm a few details and pass you over onto the phone if you are supporting them in them circumstances. So that's something that we see quite often as advisors. People might be suffering from a mental health condition or a neurodiverse condition. As long as they just give some quick details and permission, you're on the phone with them, they can pass the phone and you can complete that process with them. Second part of the process, so usually within 14 days, you will be sent out the PIP form itself. We will pop into the chat box and the links there. We do have some pointers on filling in that form. It is quite a daunting form. It's around 34 pages long. What we do recommend is try not to do it all in one session. Maybe spread it out over a couple of days. Usually you've got a month to fill that form in. but you can ask for more time if you need it. So if you're waiting on medical evidence, you could put on the form there's more evidence to follow and get that sent out, or more highly recommended is you can get it all together in one go and get that sent out. That medical evidence is really important, and we'll be talking about that very shortly. Once that form has gone out, the DWP will then work out whether you need an assessment. Now, them assessments could be at a local assessment centre. They can't usually be more than 90 minutes away from where that person lives, or they could be online or over the phone as well. Now, if that person is really going to struggle, perhaps they're suffering from a mental health condition or they can't leave the home, you can ask for a home visit. Now, you would need to give evidence why that home visit is needed. So that could potentially be for a mental health worker that's supporting you. It could be potentially from a GP, but we do need to make that very clear, because we don't want people having to go into assessment centres using public transport, and it really has a detrimental effect on their mental health, for example. So that's something a local citizen's advice would be able to help with if that person needs help gathering that evidence or negotiating. Now, at them assessments, which again can last up to 90 minutes, there will be a set of questions that will be asked by an assessor, whether that's over the phone or in person. That could make that person do some sums or express themselves. Really important to prepare for them assessments as much as possible. So take along any medications that you're taking. Could be any supporting documents that you didn't actually supply with the initial PIP form application. Really important that that's stressed at the assessment, because that assessor will pass a report on to a DWP decision maker, and then that decision maker makes a decision on basically whether you're going to be entitled to PIP, what rate you should get, and when that's going to start as well. So that's the application process itself. So 3 parts to it, quite challenging. Some people are going to need support with that process, and that's something that very much we would help out at the local citizens advice. Okay, and if we could just move on to the next slide there. So the daily living component itself, and what we're going to do is we're just going to pop in the PIP descriptors into the chat box there for you to have a look at. So there are around 10 daily living descriptors. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be entitled to every descriptor, or they're not going to score points on every descriptor, but it's really important that we do maximize the points for people that are going to go for which descriptor is relevant to them. Don't be afraid to prompt a DWP decision maker. If you should be scoring 4 points, for example, give the reasons why you should be scoring 4 points. So is it that you need supervision? Why do you need supervision? What's happened in the past? Preparing and cooking food's a really good example. So have you left pots and pans on? Did the fire brigade have to come out? Did the fire alarm go off? As a result of that, do you have a carer that comes round? Who is that carer? What would happen if that carer wasn't there to support you? Would you not be able to prepare and cook food at all? If that is the case, you should be scoring higher points. So with the DWP, they will be looking if you do need supervision, how often it is, but it's really important that we stick to the descriptors and we justify the points, is what we always say when we are supporting people with PIP itself. So the 10 daily living descriptors, we have preparing and cooking food. We have eating and drinking, which has a look at your ability to take nutrition. We have managing treatment. So that's things like, are you able to manage taking your medication? How often does managing therapy or managing treatment take you on a weekly basis? How many hours? Washing, bathing, so your ability to get in and out of the bath and keep yourself clean, or a shower. Do you need support with that? Does someone have to wash and bathe you? What parts of the body? Managing toilet needs and incontinence is another thing that we'll look at all. Dressing and undressing, so your ability to be able to dress appropriately when it's warm or cold, but also be able to physically put on certain items of clothes. They'll be having a look at your ability to communicate with other people. Reading and understanding words and symbols is another one. Mixing with others, and making decisions about money. So not going to be relevant to everyone, but just to give you an example, I did have a client who scored 0 points, didn't know the descriptors even existed. We worked through the descriptors together, and they actually scored maximum points on the first 3 descriptors. So had severe osteoarthritis of both hands, so wouldn't be able to cook for themselves, couldn't lift a pan or a knife or a fork. With eating and drinking, couldn't convey food or drink to the mouth, so literally had to have their carer holding a drink with a straw for them because she didn't have the use of her hands. Couldn't administer the treatments herself, tablets, etc., because she couldn't use her hands as well. So she scored, I think, around 18 points for the first 3 descriptors, and just on that was enough to get the enhanced rate. She'd scored even more points on the descriptors afterwards, but it just shows you if somebody doesn't know how the descriptors work or doesn't work with them, quite often it's not made clear with the application process, then they're not going to score points themselves. They're not going to know the descriptors actually exist. So really important just to use the descriptors that we've popped in the chat box there themselves. With them 10 daily living descriptors themselves, if you score between 8 and 11 points, that will get you the standard rate. If you score over 12 points, that will get you the enhanced rate for the daily living. And we'll be having a look at the rates very shortly. And if we just move on to the next slide there, thank you. And then there's the mobility component itself. So there's only 2 descriptors for this one. Planning and following a journey safely, as we discussed at the beginning of this session, is more for people that might have a mental health condition or a neurodiverse condition, or might be more vulnerable in public, perhaps a learning difficulty in some circumstances. Would they be able to follow a bus timetable? If there was a diversion for a route that they usually take, would they be at risk from getting lost? Could they pose a threat to themselves or others without realizing it due to a condition? All very much relevant for that descriptor. Then you've got the moving around descriptor, and that's very much about the physical mobility challenges. So would you be able to walk 100 yards without stopping to catch your breath? Or, potentially, would you be able to walk a little bit further, but have to keep stop to get in, or would it cause you pain? Would you walk with a limp? People that need the use of a wheelchair or have prosthetic limbs and things take a bit longer, or there are more challenges, should be scoring higher points in them circumstances. Really, really important with the mobility. Lots of people tend to think it is just about the moving around descriptor, and they miss that planning a journey and following a route safely. So you could potentially get the enhanced rate without having physical mobility challenges in them circumstances. Quite often gets missed. Okay, and if we could just move on to the next slide there. So let's have a look at the current rates there. So as we mentioned before, if you get the standard rate, so if you score between 8 and 11 points for the daily living, the 10 daily living descriptors we just looked at, that's £73.90 per week. If you were to score over the 12 points, that's going to get you the enhanced rate itself. So that's £110.40 per week. If you are to get the standard or the enhanced rate, and you do have somebody that looks after you, and that could be a family member, a neighbour, it could be a friend, as long as you get the standard or the enhanced rate and they're looking after you more than 35 hours per week, and then 35 hours do quite soon add up. If someone needs to keep a carer's diary, for example, that means that they would be entitled to carer's allowance potentially if they're earning under around £182 a month. But again, if they're claiming universal credit, it doesn't matter about the earnings rate. We could potentially look at the carers element of universal credit in them circumstances as well. So remember, carers quite often don't have time to navigate the benefit system, and they are one of the groups that are really struggling. With the mobility, if you get the standard rate, it's not as much, so it is £29.20. You would need to score between 8 points and 11 points to get that. If you get over 12 points, you would get the enhanced rate. And again, that makes a big difference because that could potentially entitle you to the Motability scheme, where you could get a disability adapted car on lease. It could be potentially that you get a scooter and then support in that support there as well. So it's really, really important just to get a full benefit check once you are entitled to personal independence payment itself. And remember, it's non-means tested. It's not like universal credit. Your earnings aren't going to affect this. You know, lots of people do work, have a disability or long-term health condition, and they are still entitled to PIP as well. It does help them to stay in employment itself. Okay. And if we could just move on to the next slide there. So we talked about the importance of medical evidence or supporting evidence. We are going to pop a link in there for you about the sort of evidence that you could use. Some doctors might charge for a letter or a new report. If you can't afford to pay, or someone that you're supporting can't, it's worth asking for copies of recent medical notes or letters from any specialists that they've referred to. You can get your NHS records downloaded for free now as well through the NHS app. Worth having a look into. That's something we would help with at the local Citizens Advice. Some doctor surgeries, if you are claiming welfare benefits such as universal credit already, or you do have a disability, do offer for free sometimes as well. But quite often medical professionals will be supportive. Do include statements from the client themselves. That PIP diary that we popped into the chat box for you. A carer's diary is often quite useful as well, because that shows the support that they give. Really good idea to keep a diary for 1 or 2 weeks on how that condition affects them, both daytime and nighttime. Is it over 51% of the time? That's something the DWP will be looking for. But other forms of evidence, if we just move on to the next slide there, could be a person that's been listed as a medical professional on a benefit application form. Just to remember, it doesn't guarantee the DWP are going to chase them all up. So if you do have a supporting letter, or just a letter that shows a diagnosis, the challenges that you have, that's something that will be really useful. Really good idea to include that supporting evidence from all medical professionals that have been supporting you, definitely within the last 12 months. So records, prescriptions, letters from medical professionals will all be useful. That's all something, if the DWP don't address it, that you could use when you're challenging a decision if you have to, because the DWP, you know, they haven't taken that evidence into account. That's why it's really important to watertight your case and get that in as soon as possible. And if we could just move on to the next slide there. So as we mentioned, so you could get higher benefits of your housing benefit, your universal credit. It could lead to an exemption from the benefit cap. We mentioned carers allowance for people that might be caring for you. Could be a vehicle tax exemption or reduction. And again, that Motability vehicle for people that get the enhanced mobility rate. So we will pop that into the chat, extra benefits that PIP might be entitled to there as well. And if we could just move on to the next slide there. So now just an opportunity for any questions that people may have. And again, thank you very much for joining us on today's session. Our next section will be on attendance allowance itself. So just checking if people do have any questions, and if we could just move on to the next slide whilst we are waiting for any questions. So again, just our learning objectives for today. So we had a look at the eligibility criteria, the application, had a look at that supporting evidence and the descriptors there themselves. So I hope you found that useful. And if we could just move on to the final slide. So just some other courses, if people are interested, that we are doing at Society Matters at the moment. Get to grips with personal independence payment is one of our most popular ones. If you'd like to jump into some more detail, we do courses on universal credit, the welfare benefit system itself, housing and homelessness, immigration and welfare benefits, a very popular one at the moment itself, and an introduction to debt itself. Okay. And if we could just move on to the final slide while we're waiting for any final questions. And that's where you can find out more about the courses we offer at Society Matters. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And again, a massive thank you to the Royal Voluntary Service for having us. And we look forward to seeing you on the next session there. Thank you very much.